Snow came sideways in the high pass, driven hard enough that it stung like thrown sand. The old woman leaned into it, head bowed, breath sawing in and out of her chest in shallow pulls that scraped her throat raw. Each step was an argument with the ground. Her boots were soaked through, toes numb, the leather stiff with ice. She tightened her grip on the hands of her daughters, two narrow wrists wrapped in sleeves that had once belonged to someone bigger, someone warmer. The girls did not cry. They had passed that stage hours ago. Now they moved with the careful silence of animals who had learned that noise wastes strength. The path had vanished sometime after dusk, swallowed by drifts that rose and fell like pale dunes. Trees loomed close, their branches bowing under the weight of snow, shedding it in sudden sighs that made the woman flinch. Every sound felt enormous in the storm. Every shadow suggested something waiting. She told herself to keep moving, to keep the girls moving, counting steps in her head so the world didn't dissolve into white. When the cabin appeared, it was so dark and squat that she almost missed it. A smear of black against the snow, a roof line bent under the load, a single window filmed with frost. Smoke threaded from a stone chimney, thin as a thought. Relief struck her so hard it nearly buckled her knees. She stumbled the last few yards, heart hammering, and raised her hand to knock. Her knuckles burned when they met the door. The sound seemed swallowed at once by the storm. She knocked again, harder, and waited, holding her breath, pressing her back to the wood to shield the girls from the wind. Seconds stretched. The cold crept into the seams of her coat and found her bones. The door opened a crack. A wedge of orange light spilled onto the snow, and with it heat that felt unreal like a memory. A man filled the opening, tall and broad. His beard rimed with frost as if he had just come in from the same storm. His eyes were steady, pale, and assessing, the kind that took in details without hurrying. He smelled of smoke and pine. "Please," she said before he could speak. The word broke apart in her mouth, frayed by the wind and by fear. Just for the night. The road. He looked past her at the girls, then at the sky, then back at her face. The pause felt like a judgment. The mountain pressed close, listening. Somewhere a branch snapped under the weight of snow. The woman braced herself for refusal, for the need to turn and walk back into the white with nothing left to offer the cold. Instead, the man opened the door wide. He stepped aside, gesturing them in with a tilt of his head. The relief that surged through her was dizzying. She herded the girls across the threshold, murmuring thanks she wasn't sure he heard. The door shut behind them with a solid thud, and the storm was suddenly outside, reduced to a distant roar. The cabin wrapped them in warmth. Fire crackled in a stone hearth, throwing light that leapt, and danced across walls darkened by age and smoke. The air smelled of resin and iron and something savory that made the woman's stomach clench painfully. She stood just inside, unsure where to put herself, snow melting off her coat and puddling on the rough plank floor. The man took the pack from her shoulders without asking, the strap leaving a burning line across her collarbone as it slid free. He hung it on a peg by the door and set about his space with efficient quiet. As if guests were a rare inconvenience but not an impossibility, he ladled stew from a pot simmering near the fire into 3 bowls, the surface rippling with heat. He set them on a scarred table, then fetched spoons, their handles worn smooth by years of use. "Sit," he said. His voice was low, unadorned, carrying the calm authority of someone used to being obeyed by the weather more than by people. The girls climbed onto the bench, hands hovering uncertainly over the bowls until the woman nodded. They blew on the surface, then sipped. Color crept back into their cheeks. The woman took her bowl last, cradling it as if it might vanish if she wasn't careful. The first mouthful sent heat flooding through her chest, loosening something tight and painful there. She closed her eyes without meaning to. They ate in near silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the wind worrying at the walls. The man sat on a stool by the hearth, mending something with a needle thick as a nail, his fingers deft. She noticed the careful order of the place as she ate. Tools hung where hands could find them without looking, boots lined near the door, a stack of split wood drying by the fire. Everything had a reason for being where it was. When the bowls were empty, the girls leaned back against the bench, sleepy and dazed. The woman wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and forced herself to speak. "Thank you," she said, the words steadier now. "We didn't mean to. The road closed early. Our ride—" Her voice wavered. She swallowed and tried again. "We thought we could make it before night." The man listened without interrupting, eyes on the fire now, as if watching the story play out there. When she finished, he nodded once. Storm's bad, he said. Worse on the pass. He rose and went to a chest by the wall, lifting the lid to reveal a trove of folded wool. He pulled out blankets thick and heavy, the kind that held heat like a promise, and laid them near the hearth. He fetched a kettle, poured hot water into a basin, and set it down. For your hands, he said, and the woman realized how cracked and swollen they were when the heat bit into her skin. The girls had drifted closer to the fire, their heads bumping together as they fought sleep. The man, Elias, she learned when he introduced himself with a brief nod, added a log to the fire, sparks leaping up the chimney. He showed them where to set their boots to dry, warned them not to put them too close. He spoke little, but each instruction carried care, the kind born of habit rather than performance. Outside, the storm hurled itself at the cabin, but inside the walls held. The woman spread the blankets, easing the girls down, tucking the wool around them until only their faces showed. Their breathing slowed, evened. She sat back on her heels, exhaustion settling over her like a second blanket. Sleep, Elias said quietly. Storm will pass by morning. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. As she lay down near her daughters, the firelight painting the ceiling with moving gold, she felt the mountain loosen its grip, just enough to let them rest. Morning arrived not with color, but with quiet. The storm had spent itself sometime before dawn, leaving behind a silence so complete it rang in the ears. Pale light filtered through the frost-laced window, turning the air inside the cabin silver and still. The fire had burned down to a bed of coals, breathing out a gentle warmth that lingered like a held breath. Elias was already awake, moving with the careful economy of a man who had learned not to waste effort in a place where effort was currency. He stirred the coals, coaxing them back to life with a sliver of pine, and set a kettle on the grate. Outside, snow lay deep and unbroken, smoothing the world into simple shapes. He pulled on his boots and stepped out long enough to read the mountain, eyes scanning the ridgeline, the angle of drift against the trees, the way the sun hinted at itself behind thin cloud. Satisfied, he returned, brushing snow from his beard. The girls stirred as the kettle began to sing. They sat up slowly, blinking, as if the warmth of the night had been a dream they feared might vanish if they moved too quickly. The woman woke last, stiff and sore, but with a clarity she had not felt in weeks. She took in the cabin again, how the light fell, how the air smelled, and something inside her steadied. Elias sliced bread thick and spread it with honey, setting the pieces on a plate. He poured tea into chipped mugs and slid them across the table. The girls accepted the food with shy gratitude. Their earlier wariness softened into curiosity. One of them asked about the animal skull mounted above the door. The other wanted to know how long he had lived so high up. He answered simply, not encouraging conversation but not shutting it down either. The woman watched the way he met their questions without condescension, and she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. When they had eaten, Elias stood and shrugged into his coat. Roads buried, he said, as if this were a fact as ordinary as the weather. But there's a way down. Not marked. The woman's heart jumped. We don't want to trouble you, she began, the old reflex rising, but he was already gathering things with decisive movements. He packed dried meat, hard cheese, and apples into their bag, adding a compass and a small coil of rope. From a peg, he took down a wool scarf and worked a needle through a torn edge, mending it with quick practice stitches. When he was done, he wrapped it around the younger girl's neck, adjusting it until it sat right. They stepped outside into a world transformed. Snow glittered under the thin sun, the sky a pale bowl overhead. The cold was sharp but clean, no longer biting with the desperation of the night before. Elias set off without ceremony, breaking trail with long, sure strides, his weight finding purchase where the drifts concealed hazards. The woman followed, the girls between them, their steps shorter, more careful. Each breath steamed in the air. The path Elias chose did not resemble a path at all. It wound between trees, skirted a drop where the snow lay deceptively smooth, crossed a frozen creek at a narrow bend where ice held firm. At each turn he paused, pointing out what to watch for. The sag of snow that meant hollow beneath, the dark line that marked thin ice, the way the wind carved drifts into shapes that told stories if you knew how to read them. At a steep section, he cut steps with the edge of his snowshoe, then turned and offered a hand to the woman, steadying her without a word. The girls moved with growing confidence, their fear replaced by the thrill of doing something hard and surviving it. Laughter slipped out once, then again, small and bright in the cold. They stopped where the ridge narrowed, the valley opening below like a promise. Smoke rose from distant chimneys, thin threads against the white. Elias halted, planting his staff and surveying the descent. He knelt and showed the girls how to angle their feet, how to slide rather than fight the slope. He placed the compass in the woman's palm and closed her fingers around it. "Keep the sun on your right," he said. "If clouds come in, follow the creek. It'll lead you home." Home. The word lodged in her chest. She nodded, throat tight. "This is as far as I go," Elias said. He straightened, the mountain behind him vast and patient. He reached into his coat and produced a small tin, pressing it into her hand. "Salve," he said, "for blisters." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw the lines etched by wind and years, the steadiness earned by solitude. Gratitude surged, overwhelming. "You changed everything," she said, the words tumbling out before she could shape them more carefully. "You didn't have to." He shrugged, a modest gesture that belied the magnitude of what he had done. "Mountain teaches you," he replied. "You help when you can." They stood there a moment longer, the silence companionable. Then the woman took the girl's hands and they began the descent. Elias watched as they went, his figure a still point against the vastness, until the trees swallowed them and the valley drew them down into its waiting arms. When he turned back toward his cabin, the mountain felt different, not smaller, but kinder, as if it approved. He broke trail again, the snow whispering underfoot, carrying with him the quiet knowledge that sometimes, in helping others find their way, you remind yourself why you learned the paths in the first place.